Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Every now and again, a book comes along that is so powerful and so heart-wrenching and yet uplifting, it stays with you long after you've read the last page. Like a tongue probing a sore tooth, you go back to it time and time again, examining it from all angles. Where does it hurt and why? A story that touches your soul and asks you to think about what it means to be a person in the world we live in. Who are we and what do we stand for? I have a few such books in mind, and the most recent is Tabitha Bird's stunning debut novel, A Lifetime of Impossible Days. This story brought me to tears on more than one occasion. It was magical, life-affirming and utterly raw. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. And so with great joy, I welcome Tabitha to the podcast today. Hi, Tabitha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's an honour to be here today.
Tabitha, there must be something in the air right across Australia at the moment because the quality of fiction from debut novelists is quite simply breathtaking. I'm stunned to learn that this is your first novel. Tell me, have you always wanted to be a writer?
Oh, well, thank you. That's a real compliment. And yeah, I agree. There is just some amazing writers out there at the moment, and many of them who have literally given me great hope as I was doing drafts of this novel, especially as I was going through the editing process. Yeah, I have always wanted to be a writer, but I think it was more that I wanted to be a storyteller. When I was a little girl, I loved telling stories. I didn't know the word author, but I did understand what it was to tell stories because I used to tell them to my sister and myself and my teddy bears and my dog. So I wanted to be a storyteller, but it wasn't until much later that I thought, oh my goodness, that means you could actually be what was known as an author. But yes, from very young, I knew that storytelling was going to be something I wanted to do.
There's a gorgeous photo of you at the back of your book. You're surrounded by symbols peppered throughout the book, things like gumboots, jam drops, tea, stories, memories, and healing. It's a book that has the whiff of magic about it, something in the nature of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol and Enid Blyton's The Magic Faraway Tree.
Wow, yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about those things that I've just mentioned?
I can, yeah. So, wow, yes, because both those stories are amazing. I grew up just breathing in the faraway tree and all of the stories about that chair that flew and lands that came to the top of that tree, and I just loved them. Throughout my book, I didn't consciously think about adding those sorts of details. They just appeared and I let them appear. And it wasn't until going back and doing drafts, particularly then when it was signed and I was doing the editing process with Penguin, that I realised how much I had used them and how they were peppered throughout the book and how much they meant to me. So things like the jam drops, I realised that baking was quite a magical thing for me, and almost a healing or meditative sort of activity that I would do when I was stressed or worried. And so I gave that activity to the Willas in the book without even thinking about it, actually. And gumboots were the same. I realized that I loved the whole idea of clomping around in something. And I myself have a growing collection of gumboots. Since writing the story, I decided that I didn't have enough of them. And just like the Willas, I liked the idea of what they represent in meaning. There's that sense of being stronger or somehow bigger or somehow feeling more brave or courageous when you have something on your foot that makes a bit of a noise as you step about the place. And little super gumboots Willa, who's 8, she definitely is in need, I think, of something that represents a bit of courage. And so gumboots are that for her. So I think when I was taking those author photos, I wanted to make sure that those little things that were peppered throughout the book could be in that photo. And there's also, of course, the chihuahua.
Yes, of course. Let's not forget that. We'll come back to the chihuahua later.
Okay.
I haven't forgotten. For those who haven't read it, Tabitha, can you tell me a little bit more about what your book is about?
Yeah, of course. So the book is a story of Willa Waters. She is a 33-year-old woman who is not doing so well. She has been running very hard her whole life away from trauma. And like many of us, the way in which she's decided to deal with her past and things that hurt is to actually not deal with them. And that isn't working so well for her. She's experiencing depression and a number of other things that are really holding her back in life. She's not able to fully enjoy her children's childhood or her husband. And she meets herself through a time slip that is created in her backyard. She meets herself at aged 8, which is Super Gumboots Willa. She's the youngest character. And also herself at age 93, which is Silver Willa, the older character. And together those three Willas need to come together, and they need to work out how to save their future. I can't really say more than that.
It's a fascinating structure. All three versions of your Willa have to essentially pierce the veil of time and come face to face with each other to give them the ability to solve a mystery and save their future. So I wanted to know what inspired you to use this device as your narrative structure.
Good question. Yeah. Funnily enough, that narrative structure was very late to show up in the book. In the early drafts, there was really just the main character, Middle Willa, at 33, and a lot of flashbacks to her past. And I remember sitting one day in counselling with my counsellor, who is an incredibly wise woman. And I remember saying to her, I just wish that I could go back and love that little girl that I was. And oftentimes I would also say, I wish I had someone cheering me on. And she said to me, sounds like an idea. And we came home and I thought about it, and I thought, I wonder what Middle Willa would do if she was actually really confronted with herself at the age of 8. 8 just tended to be the age where I had a lot more memories myself. So that was the age that I went to. And then what would it be like if she then also had somebody to cheer her on? And so what would it be like to have someone at 93, meet herself at 93? And I was surprised how much she really didn't like herself. And she really was not that happy to meet herself at either one of those ages to begin with. And so I realized I had a great deal of tension and a way through fiction to work out some of my own issues, perhaps. So that's how that got started.
So I understand this novel draws on your own childhood experiences. And so I wanted to ask you, has it been an important part of your healing journey?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it has actually. And the book began its life, I'm going to say nearly 11 years ago, as what at the time was a memoir. I just started counselling to deal with some past childhood trauma, and thank goodness my counsellor, who not only, apart from being very wise and incredibly skillful, was also an avid reader. And she asked me a question one day in counselling. She said to me, "What does the pain look like? Not what does it feel like, not tell me about what happened, but what does it actually, what does it have texture? Does it have voice?" And I went that and I thought about it and I was like, well, what would my pain look like if it had a voice? And then I thought, actually, could my pain have a voice? Childhood trauma had really silenced my voice and made me believe that even as an adult woman, that my story didn't have value, that I didn't have value, that I didn't have a lot of self-worth. And I was really challenged by this notion that I could actually decide to give my pain voice. I could actually speak it. And my way of processing that was not to speak it, but it was to write it. And at the time, I had repressed dreams of wanting to be a writer. So I wasn't owning the fact that I wanted to be a writer, but that's the way in which it came out of me. And so I started sending my counsellor just these stories of this character called Beast and a little girl that he had trapped in the cave of his heart. Of my heart, and just sending pages after pages of it to my counsellor, and I started processing my own journey through it. About 120,000 words later, my counsellor said to me, "My goodness, you have basically got here a book." And I laughed at her and said, no, I don't. I just have a thing that I've written to you to help, me process what's going on. But I realized that, in fact, I did have a book, and it was many years later before I discovered that that in fact, through redrafting it, that I could write. And that memoir actually came very close to finding a literary agent. But ultimately, I was told that the story was not a healed story. It didn't come across as a healed story, and it didn't come across as being hopeful. And although that crushed me at the time, I went back and looked at it and thought that they were right, that it wasn't a healed story, and that it wasn't actually time for that story to be born, and that, in fact, memoir was not something I wanted to write at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't even something that I read very much of. And when I stood in front of my bookshelves and looked at what I read, it was fiction, and it was fiction with a magical twist. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to take what is my emotional truth and I'm going to put it inside of fiction. And I just love, there's a quote that I love, and it just says, fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. And for me, that's what this book is. It's completely made up, but it's emotionally true. And through the Willas, I have been able to sort through a lot more things than really even what I was able to sort through in the memoir, even though it's completely made up.
It's very uplifting to hear you speak about your writing process in that way, that coming to realisation of what it is that you wanted to write, and heal through that process.
Yeah, thank you. It is really difficult. I think we sit down sometimes and it can be quite cathartic to just let it all pour out. But then ultimately, a healed story is one in which we can give to a reader and not need anything back. We can just give it. It's not attached to me. It's not a part of me, almost, in a way. It's something that I have finished with and feel happy and able to completely gift now into the world. And I don't. The Willas can go and they can do what the Willas will do.
Yeah.
Without me feelings that I might break, if that makes any sense. Because I think it is a really vulnerable story, and it was a story that I needed to make sure I was very ready to let go of. And so I can say that come June 4th, I will be completely ready to send them out there into the world with their gumboots on.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. That's brilliant. I wanted to say that this book reminded me in many ways of another book that I read in the past year, Holly Ringland's The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. And yes. I think listeners may remember that I interviewed Holly on this podcast last year in episode 9. And in Alice's path to healing from the trauma she experienced in her childhood, she learnt the language of flowers. And in your book, Willa used her stories to help her forget the trauma in the first place and to block out the truth of all that happened to her. It's a very powerful method of storytelling. And I was interested to hear that you say that you felt that your voice had been silenced, that you didn't feel like you had any value or self-worth. And I think, that certainly had parallels in Alice's story. And I noticed that you also had a copy of that book in that beautiful photo that I just spoke about earlier.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I adore that book. Holly Ringland's Lost Flowers of Alice Hart is just a gorgeous novel. Absolutely adore it.
Fans of that book will find your book equally mesmerising and beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Now, I don't want to read something into your story that isn't there, but it seems to me that the three Willas are alternate identities despite being the same person, and that each of them suffer from gaps in their memories. So 8-year-old Willa has blocked out her own story, 33-year-old Willa doesn't trust her own story, and 93-year-old Willa can't remember it.
Yes. Yes, this is so true.
That seems to be, a common way for people to deal with a traumatic childhood experience, dissociative personality or disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. While I was healing from my own trauma, my counsellor would explain at times what was going on from I don't know if medical is the terminology, but from a professional standpoint, what was going on. And she explained to me at one point that because children's brains aren't fully formed, if you like, they're innocent, but also they don't have the ability to comprehend in the way in which adults do, that in a way they're protected, and the way in which the brain protects itself is by going offline. And when a child goes offline, that's why a lot of survivors of trauma, especially trauma in their early years, will have very few actual memories of it where they can say this happened, that happened, and then this happened. Now, some do, but many survivors of trauma, particularly if it happened when they were very young, can't remember a lot about it, or only remember parts of it, and it's very broken for them. And that's the reason, because the brain has gone offline, so we don't lay down memory in the same way. And I think that's why when I grew up, you almost feel as if you don't have a right then to your own trauma story, because you don't remember all of it, and you feel that you might in fact not be believed because there are patches in it, and you can't. If you were put on a stand and made to say, well, then what happened and then what happened, it would be muddled, or it would come out not linear, and people would think, oh, well, therefore, it can't have happened. So that I wanted to tell, there was, I guess, the burden for me was that the trauma story be told properly, that this is how little girls behave when something is happening to them that is almost unprocessable, if that's a word.
Yeah.
Their brain goes offline. And for Super Gumboots Willa, the way in which she coped when her brain went offline was to just tell herself stories. And it's a pretty highly developed, highly imaginative way of coping with what is essentially something that no child should have to cope with. And when the body is being completely overwhelmed in every other way and overpowered in every other way, it's almost a sense of maintaining some sort of control, in that she can tell herself some other stories and go somewhere else in her mind, which is exactly what she does. But then, of course, we see as she grows up, middle Willa has breaks there in that memory, and feels a great deal of guilt over either not remembering or having those memories filled in by people who do not have her best interests at heart. I won't say more than that, because I don't want to give anything too much away, but it's no wonder, therefore, that she just, decides to believe, therefore, that she's not worth anything, or that, that she isn't telling the truth, or that, because she has those breaks in her own memory, and story for her then isn't something happy making. It's something almost, it's almost icky in a way, because the stories were something that came to her during a particularly tough time in her life, which is why she says quite early in the book she doesn't want to tell stories to her children. She doesn't want to use her imagination. She knows how that just brings back a lot of memories for her that she would rather not have brought back, or even just sensations that she would have not brought back. So yes, it was very deliberate, and it was very carefully done, and I made sure that I went back and just checked that, and even did some research around that. So even outside of my own story, just checking that that I was representing that well. I don't want, yes, it is fiction, but I also wanted there to be truth in that, because there are many, many women and men who have survived trauma, and I wanted them to be able to see that and go, yes, that resonates for me. Yes, that's a fair telling. That was important for me. And I just wanted to say too that, Holly Ringland's story did come out obviously last year in March, and one of the things that gave me just great courage was just watching her stand there and speak so eloquently about her story, and me being able to see that it was embraced. I think that's just so important. I think survivors of trauma need to see other trauma survivors have their stories embraced, even if their stories be hidden or be jewels in fiction. It's just so important that for me anyway, to have seen her do that, it gave me such hope and such courage as I was doing my drafts. I just think that's why her book is in that photo.
So your story is set in Boona in southeast Queensland.
Yes.
And you didn't always live in Boona. So how important was your move to rural Queensland as part of your writing journey?
Yeah, it ended up being a lot more important than what I initially thought it was going to be. We had a little boy join our family about 18 months prior to moving out to Boona. And we were living in a very small fix-me-up or costing a fortune home in Brisbane. And we just, with the arrival of a third boy, just looked at my husband and went, this is just not going to work in this house. And I actually wanted to see my husband sometimes. So we realized that we needed to move somewhere where we didn't have to upgrade our mortgage in order to upgrade the house. Yeah. So that was the original reason for moving to Boonah. But when I moved out to Boonah, we were just embraced completely as a family. It was a difficult time for our family because this little boy came to us with lots of his own issues. And I really needed some support, both as a mother, but also our other two boys needed some support, and as a family. And so we came out here, and I just loved Boonah. But then I realized that my story up till that point didn't have a clear setting, which sounds funny, but I just hadn't really set it anywhere. It existed as a story with really no setting. And I thought to myself, what these Willas need is a community around them. We need to see a place where a magic could happen. And we bought our old Queenslander, which we currently live in at the moment. And I thought to myself, this house has story. There is story in the dint of the floorboards. There is story in the walls. Story in the marks of the paint, and I thought this would be a great place for the Willas to live. So the Willas in the book not only live in Boonah, but they live in the house that I live in. I gave them my old Queenslander, and it ended up being really important in writing the story because it gave me every moment that I was writing. I had the visual sounds and sights of the house that they were living in, but also then the seasons of Boonah. So we have the winter and what that's like in a country town, the dryness matching up with, what's going on for the Willas, and then right at the end coming into spring, which is matching up with what's going on with the Willas. So I also use just the landscapes of Boonah, maybe in a subtle way, but just to match up to with also what the Willas, their own internal journey. So it was no mistake that I started the book in the winter. For me, the Willas are very much in the winter of their lives when the story begins, and when it comes through to the end, in fact, the Willas are in spring, and that seemed right for me as well. So it ended up being really important to the writing of that book in ways I had never predicted.
I loved the character of Grammy in your book.
Yes.
She's a beautiful character, and one that I felt was really very important to 8-year-old Willa. Was Grammy modelled on your own grandmother?
She was and she wasn't. So there's things definitely about Grammy that I'd match up with my own nanny. And the book is actually dedicated to my grandmother, so she's an incredibly important person in my life. And there are little scenes in the book that I borrowed from my nanny. So my nanny feeds possums. She probably shouldn't, but she does, and no one's going to tell an 83-year-old woman what they should and shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Especially not my nanny. So she feeds possums, and I gave that to Grammy in the book, that she feeds possums too. And but there's little things like Grammy sews, and my nanny has never and would never sew anything. She would be the first to tell you that she would swear so long and so hard trying to make anything that it would not be worth it for anyone living around her. But that sense of magic making and that sense of unconditional love is very much my own nanny given to Grammy. But yeah, Grammy is definitely her own entity in every other way, shape and form. But yeah, she is kind of modelled on my grandmother.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And has your nanny seen the book yet?
Yes, my nanny has seen the book. So my nanny has actually been very, very unwell, and she's been in hospital, and she's fine with me sharing this. It's actually on my Facebook page too. But we did at one point not that long ago think we were going to lose her. And Penguin Random House were just brilliant in fast-tracking a copy of the book to her so that she could hold the book just in case this was going to be that we weren't going to have her with us anymore. But thank goodness we didn't lose her. She still is very sick and has been diagnosed with cancer. But she is just my biggest supporter. When she held that book for the first time, she burst into tears. as if it was a book that she herself had written. And she's just been so proud of me every step of the way. In her eyes, I am a hero, but she's wrong because in my eyes, she's my hero. But she held it, and every day my uncle reads her one chapter.
Oh,
And
bless.
yeah, when I go round, I read it to her as well, and she always has questions and things she wants to know. But she's every single step of the way. She has just been so incredibly happy for me. She just sobbed and sobbed when I told her that I'd had a book deal with Penguin, and from that moment on, if you're anywhere near my grandmother, you will be told about my book. She's lovely.
I love that. That's just beautiful.
Thank you.
So tell me, have you been pleased with the reception the book is getting so far?
Yes. So far, I've made people cry.
Yes.
The team at Penguin Random House had me down because the heads of QBD booksellers were down there, and a number of them had a copy of the Ark and had read it, and I had been told on more than one occasion that I was responsible for tears. And to me, that's just a huge compliment that people would connect with my characters, and that those characters are living off the page is just such a compliment, and I'm just forever grateful for that. It's early days. It hasn't been out very long. There's just the Ark so far, and my box of author copies that went out. So it's just early days so far. But so far, it appears that, the Willas are definitely making their impact on people's hearts, which is more than just such a gift. Such a gift.
You must be incredibly proud.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am. I'm also very, very grateful and very humbled. I am very much aware that you don't get to be in this position without many, many people who've put so much into my life. And I know that I would not be standing here today without my counsellor and without my husband, who's been with me now for 21 years, but we're high school sweethearts from when we were 16. And I wouldn't be here without their support and their love, without my boys and my grandmother, and just without Penguin, who saw that book when it was such a mess and just went, there is something beautiful here and we'd like to help you find it. And they have just been every step of the way just supportive. So I am proud, and I'm also just incredibly grateful.
Now, this interview wouldn't be complete unless I mentioned 8-year-old Willa's relationship with her Chihuahua, Frog Dog.
Yes.
A brave and loyal dog who showed great courage despite her tiny stature. Now, was Frog Dog inspired by your own Chihuahua Lion?
Actually, Frog Dog was inspired by a Chihuahua I had when I was a little girl called Wiggy.
Okay. Got that completely wrong.
Wiggy was actually called Chihuahua, and then it became Wiggy. Don't ask me how, in the way in which children name things. But Wiggy came into my life. My parents lost a baby in between me and my sister, and it really just broke me. I was old enough to understand. I was almost four at the time. I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And my mother decided that I needed a little friend, and she was quite right. I definitely needed a little friend. So I was gifted with this tiny, tiny little black dog that I named Wiggy, and she lived through till I was 18 years old.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah, so that was Frog Dog for me, was Wiggy. And then, of course, I couldn't be without a Chihuahua, so I've always had a Chihuahua in my life after that. And when I started dealing with this trauma about 11 years ago, my husband bought me another Chihuahua, and that's the Chihuahua I currently own, and her name is Lion. And so Lion is the other Chihuahua that you find in the book, and she is my constant companion, actually sitting with me as we do this interview.
Are you working on anything else at the moment?
Oh, yes, I am working on something else at the moment. There is another story that has captured my heart. It captured my heart about 18 months ago, and I began working on it. With my grandmother being sick, I put it on hold for a little while, but she took me aside recently and sat me down, as only grandmothers can, and said, Tabitha Ann.
Oh, you're in trouble.
Anne, because we share, my middle name is her first name. She said, Tabitha Ann, you need to get back to those stories, my girl, because that is what you do. And she was right. And so I started writing it again. So there will be another one. Penguin have asked for the next 3 chapters of the next one. They're eagerly awaiting. And I am definitely planning on getting to them very shortly. So yes, my hope is that there will be many more.
So if listeners wanted to find out a little bit more about you and your books, where can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. So I am all over the place, but I have a website. So it's just www.tabithaannbird.com. But also, if you Google my name in any variety, Tabitha Bird or Tabitha Ann Bird, you'll find me on Instagram, on Twitter, and also on Facebook, where I share videos like my nanny opening my book for the first time and other things that move my heart.
I just wanted to quickly ask you if you're planning on touring for the release of your book.
Absolutely. I'm so looking forward to that, actually. I'm really looking forward to interacting with readers and hearing what they think and answering questions. So yes, and tour dates are all up on my website at the moment throughout Queensland, so throughout Boona and the Scenic Rim area, Boona, Kalbar, Mount Tamborine, then on to Greater Brisbane area, Avid Reader for Brisbane readers and writers. They will know Avid Reader Bookstore, Stones, Books at Stones throughout the whole Brisbane area, then up the Sunshine Coast, and then hopefully down to Sydney and over the border. And we'll see what comes of those after, but hopefully them in August. But everything will be up on the website as soon as it's locked in, so readers can see what might be close to them.
I wish you every success with this book. I know that A Lifetime of Impossible Days will hold a special place in people's hearts as well as on their bookshelves. Thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you so much. And to all the readers out there, I hope you enjoy the Willas immensely, and thank you for inviting them into your homes.
And now, listeners, for a chance to get your hands on a signed copy of this enchanting debut novel, head over to my Instagram account and follow the directions to enter the draw to win. Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.